You're listening to the Sisters-in-Laws podcast, a faith-based podcast that spotlights Black women who replace silence with storytelling around pregnancy and infant loss and infertility. Black women experience miscarriage and stillbirth 4 to 5 times more likely than white women, according to the NIH and CDC. Whether you've experienced a miscarriage, infant loss, stillbirth, are trying to conceive, or have an infertility diagnosis, you will learn about resources and strategies to heal, gain clarity, peace, hope, and find an empowering path forward after loss. I'm your host, Erica M. McAfee, and you will hear me interview sisters-in-laws who have healed from such a painful and traumatic experience by sharing their testimonies and stories to inspire and help others turn their pain into their purpose. Now let's get started.
Well, thank you so much, Shana, for being on the podcast.
For sure. I love it. I'm glad to be here. I'm excited about it.
Awesome. So I would love for you to share in your own words a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Well, I am currently a mom to 2 living children. I have a stepson and who's 11 and a newborn who is 3 weeks. I'm also a wife. I'm an attorney. I have been out of work, obviously, for maternity leave currently, but I work in the city of Milwaukee, and I work in contracts, and it is not always the best fun work, but it is good work, and so I'm pretty busy.
Awesome. So I would love for you to take us back on your journey to motherhood and share with us your lost story.
Sure. So my journey is a long one. It feels very, very long, but I guess it didn't start too long ago. We got married in May of 2015, and about 7 months into being married, we found out we were pregnant. And so I think for the most part, I mean, I was definitely shocked, but we were happy and ready and moved forward with great anticipation of what parenthood would look like. And I'm somebody who was just very much so just believed in this like predestined journey that we all have. And I foresaw what my life was going to be like, parenting, period. I thought I was having a girl. And so I was going into all of these visions of having life with a little girl, but we found out very early we were having a boy. And so pregnancy was pretty uneventful. I did feel a lot of swelling. I had a lot of headaches. And when I would go to my appointments, we decided to actually do prenatal care as part of a group because our OBGYN, she asked us to. She said that it was a group of young women who were predominantly underserved and underrepresented. And she was excited to have me be a part of the group to help tour and minister to some of the young ladies who maybe just needed to see somebody different in their lives. I don't know, whatever her reasoning was, but we agreed. Just the type of people that we are. We were definitely looking forward to having more connections because we had recently moved to Wisconsin where we live now. And so because we were a part of the group prenatal care, we didn't have the typical prenatal appointments that you would have. We would all come down and sit in a circle, and then you would go get your blood pressure taken, and then you would go to behind a curtain and she would do an ultrasound or listen to the baby's heartbeat. And so as the months went on and we did that, my blood pressure was always very, very high at the beginning of the sessions, but she would wait and take it again at the end of the session. And it was always in a normal range. And so the day before I had my first son, we had a regular appointment session, and they took my blood pressure and it was again very, very high. And one of the nurse made the comment, oh, if your blood pressure is this high, you should be hospitalized. And I was like, okay. And she was like, so, we'll just take it again to make sure it's real. And she was like asking me, was it real? I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't take my blood pressure on my own to know whether or not it's good or bad. I just listen to whatever they tell me. I didn't do any researching on this, very much so just listening to whatever professionals told me at this time. And so they did. I got my first cervical check that day as well. And she told me I might have some bleeding the next day. And if I do, if it's more than a pad's worth, then I need to call or come in so that they could check me. But otherwise, not to worry. And so I never got my blood pressure checked again. So I don't know if it went down or not. The following day, I went to work and I went to the bathroom at work. I had been at work for about an hour and I saw blood. And I hadn't had any bleeding the whole pregnancy. So it worried me. And I worked in Milwaukee, but we lived in a city that was about 20 to 30 minutes away from Milwaukee. And so I was like, well, I'm going to the doctor immediately because this is odd. And so I called my husband. I told him that I was bleeding and it was abnormal. I wasn't in a lot of pain. I was a little bit of cramping, but the blood is what scared me. And so as I was driving to the hospital, it went from like, oh, this is a little bit uncomfortable, to I was all out screaming to the top of my lungs, feeling like somebody was ripping me apart from the inside. I was driving down the freeway doing about 95 miles per hour. I had one hand on the ceiling and I was driving with the other hand. I had my body halfway lifted off of the seat because I was in so much pain. And so we finally get to the hospital. My husband was already there. They wheeled me up. And within about 20 minutes, they had me knocked out and we were doing an emergency C-section because they couldn't find his heartbeat. So he was born that day at about 10:30 in the morning. It was a very long day. So the day started with him being born. They told me when I came into consciousness again that he was alive. That was the first thing they said, that he was alive, but he was in a critical condition. And so he was not breathing when he was born. He had to be resuscitated twice. They ended up transferring him to a hospital that was out of state, but about an hour and a half away from where we were living, almost 2 hours, to where they had a higher level NICU to be able to attend to him. And so within hours of his birth, they pretty much told us that he had a brain injury from lack of oxygen at birth and that he may have had a stroke in utero, that they weren't sure. They went through all the tests with the MRIs and whatnot, and pretty much just came to this grim prognosis that, we should pretty much just let him die because he was never going to make it. He wouldn't see the outside of the hospital, let alone have any kind of quality of life if he did make it. But they really were just trying to encourage us to pull any kind of support from him because he would be a vegetable forever. And so it was really no point of continuing the life-saving measures that they were doing. And so I was still in the hospital at this time. My husband is the one that's receiving all of this news. He followed them. Within about 2 hours of his arrival at the NICU, my husband got there, and that's the news that they were telling him. They didn't really relay that to me at the time. They just told me he was sick. So I didn't really get what was happening with him until I was discharged a few days later. So that's how motherhood started for me. It was very, very, very traumatic. It was, I went from just a regular day to being a mom of a baby that was, that I didn't know was going to live. So he stayed in the NICU for about almost 9 weeks. He was just shy of 2 months when he came home, and motherhood looked much different from what I thought it would. He had a lot of special needs. He was on the G-tube because he couldn't eat by mouth. He didn't come home on oxygen. He just had suctioning and whatnot, but it was a lot. He was diagnosed with cerebral palsy by the time he was about almost about around a year. We were trying to get a lot of things for him that we couldn't get unless he had an official diagnosis. So we got our diagnosis a little bit early than most, at least by what I've heard, than most kids get diagnosed. So that's how it started. He was born in August of 2016. And then we decided to try again. And so in 2018, January of 2018, we got pregnant again. And this time it was a girl. Pregnancy was relatively uneventful, very uncomfortable, but uneventful. I did get diagnosed with gestational diabetes this time. And so I had to monitor my sugar and what I ate and whatnot. And, but it was not controlled by eating because the advice that I was given by doctors and nutritionists was not good advice. And I was not eating the way I really should have. in order to be able to monitor my sugars with just by my diet. And so I had to get on insulin. I also was doing injections to prevent premature labor, which in my opinion now in retrospect, I don't think was quite necessary because I didn't really go into labor. I had a placental abruption with Bryce. I'm sorry, I left that part out. The reason why I was bleeding and all of that was because my placenta had separated. And so that's why he had a lack of oxygen and whatnot, is because my placenta abrupted, which is not the same as going into premature labor. My cervix was closed. And so for the second pregnancy, I did get those shots. And every appointment, I got a little bit more monitoring towards the end where I did the ultrasounds more at the end. But other than that, it wasn't anything that they really gave me or did that was a whole lot different. I did have a black OB the first time. I had a black OB the second time. And on purpose, I just had a different one the second time she was phenomenal. She really was. And when I got to 34 weeks, I had got up one day to go to work, and the busyness of taking care of Bryce is my first son's name. Taking care of him is all encompassing, and I can be, just like single mind focused. And I didn't really notice if she was moving or not. I really don't recall if she was moving that morning at all. I was just busy trying to get out the door. But by the time I was driving to work, I did notice that I didn't feel her at that moment, because usually I felt her during the drive. And by the time I dropped Bryce off and got to work, I said, still pretty odd that I haven't felt her at all. This is not good. And I usually go with my instinct. I don't wait around and play games. And so I ate something and I still didn't feel her move. That's when I called the doctor, and they said, well, give it a couple hours. If you still don't feel anything, you come in. I hung up and drove and called my husband on the way, but I went to the doctor immediately because I just knew it wasn't right. Once we got there, they did the ultrasound. No, they did. The nurse was just trying to find the heartbeat with the Doppler, and she couldn't. She called in another nurse, and they're moving my belly all around and nothing is happening, and she can't find it. And at one point, I heard something, but apparently that was my heartbeat, not the baby's. And so I got a little bit excited thinking, okay, well, everything's okay. Maybe I don't know what's going on, but they can still save her or whatever. By the time that lasted for all of like 20 minutes with them fighting to find a heartbeat, then they took me to the room where they did an actual ultrasound, but they pulled the monitor away from me so I couldn't see. My husband could see the screen, and he said he saw immediately that the baby wasn't moving and that there was no heartbeat. But they waited what felt like a very long time before I said, okay, do you see anything? What's going on? And she said, I'm sorry. I didn't hear her finish what she was saying because I just went to a place in my mind that was like, this just can't be real. Like it was, I had always in my head, and this was also something that I didn't really share with my husband until recently. I felt like I would never have her, that she would never be born alive, or if she was born alive, she was going to die, or it was going to be something dramatic. I felt like I was never going to be able to be her mom. From the time that I found out we were pregnant that it was a girl, that whole process, I had been having this self-talk that she was going to die. And so when they told me she was dead and that her heart was no longer beating, I immediately felt an overwhelming sense of guilt, and that it was my fault for speaking that and saying that to myself, that she was never going to be mine, never come home, that I was the reason why she didn't make it. And so I just started hollering and screaming at the doctor's office. My doctor finally got there, and she cried with us and hugged us, and we prayed together and everything. And then that same day, we got our parents to come up and watched our children. And I went in about 7:00 that night and we went in at about 7, but the baby was not born until a couple hours later. We did a C-section. So because I had an emergency C-section with my first son, I opted to have the C-section for the second, just because it felt like I couldn't conceptualize going through my first labor experience that I really, really wanted to have. But knowing that the baby wouldn't be born alive, it just seemed too much for me to bear at that time. And so they did the operation, and we got wheeled back into the recovery room. And very quickly after we got back, they brought her back. They did have one of those those cots that are cold so she could stay with us as long as we wanted her to. And so she stayed with us for quite some time. My husband was a little bit more hesitant about touching her or holding her. I was at first, but I think for me, it was more, I knew we weren't going to get those memories back. And if I never held her or touched her, that's just a memory I would never have. And I couldn't, relive that experience to have any kind of connection with her in the physical. And so I did. I held her, not a long time, but I did hold her. And right before I handed her back, it was an instinct for me to kiss her forehead. And I never forget how cold she was. And I just kept thinking, like, they say that God can't put more on you than you can bear, but I can't bear anymore. Like, what happened with Bryce felt like a loss. It felt like a loss because I had to mourn the child I thought I was going to have. And I had to mourn that over and over again as he didn't hit milestones or do certain things. I had to get it in my head that, I was not going to have the baby that I had envisioned for those months that I was pregnant, or envisioned my whole life when you think about having a family. And then I had to mourn actually the passing of my baby and actually deal with the death of a baby that was supposed to be here. And so going through that process was very, very dark for me. After Aleeya was her name, after she passed, I feel like I legitimately went into a depression. And for several months, I don't know if anybody around me even noticed how I was acting or responding, but it was terrible. I felt like I couldn't function. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My next breath felt suffocated. And so I had to get very intentional and on purpose about how I was grieving and how I was dealing with the death, how I was dealing with, in the midst of dealing with her death, I still had to take care of Bryce, which was a lot. To put it simply, he had a lot of needs. His needs continued to grow as he got older. And then we also had a lot of hospitalizations from him being sick. And so even when I was pregnant, he was relatively healthy. But after she passed in September of 2018. And the following year got really tough for Bryce. So it was trying to figure out how to mourn that death, how to take care of my living child. I felt like I was going through postpartum depression in a sense. I don't know. I just know that it was very hard and dark for me.
Yeah, I'm going to stop you right there because share about just the next steps in that process after she passed away. Did you all have a memorial for her out of town, or how did that part work? Because I know you mentioned that you did have some extra time with her in the cuddle cot or the carrying cradle or whatever at the hospital. And were y'all able to have a memorial? And then how was that next year, as you were just mentioning, with going through the motions of mourning, grieving, postpartum depression, and then still trying to take care of your son who was having a lot of health challenges?
Yeah, I mean, it was honestly that part of my life. I would say that after when Bryce was in the NICU was the hardest part of my life, but it was not. It was definitely this period because we did not have a memorial for her. We cremated her. I didn't want to. I felt like I almost felt like this experience was so my own that I didn't want to share. I didn't want to go into, now nobody knew her or got to see her, touch her, feel her outside of what I felt in my body, and them getting to see her after she had already passed. But, and when I say them, it was just my husband, my mother, and my stepfather that got to see her in the hospital, that I felt like I didn't want to keep dealing with it. I feel like if I had a memorial or some type of service where people came together and stuff, it's just another highlight on the tragedy that is my life. Like, because it was so rough with Bryce and continuing to be rough with him, and then to lose a baby, I just felt like I was cursed, and I didn't want everybody else to have a spotlight on me and the trauma that my family was going through in a memorial service, like showing up, and because that's what I felt like it would have turned into. It wouldn't have been about just like memorializing Aleeya. It would have, that in my mind, I saw it as a highlight reel on the tragedies of my life. That's really what I felt like it was. And so we didn't do that. We just cremated her, brought her back home. We had family that was here kind of supporting us in the immediate, right after she had passed, for about a week, maybe a week and a half. And then they left, and that felt like another loss. Like, you know, going through all of this, you have the support, and then when everybody leaves again, you're right back into, you know, the horror that was my life in that moment. So in the days following, the weeks following, the loss was just, it was, I don't know how else to describe it than just being the absolute worst part of dealing with all the traumas that we've been through, because I just felt like it felt like there was no getting out of this. There's nothing that you can do in your life that is going to bring you joy. You can try to do it on purpose. You can do it on accident. It doesn't matter when it comes to childbirth, at least. But it didn't feel like that. It didn't feel like it was just directed towards childbirth, even though that's where the trauma came from. It felt like my whole life was cursed. And it just came to fruition through my womb. And that's not facts, but that's what my mind was taking me. You know, I was going into this place of just complete isolation and darkness in the weeks. And I would say she passed in September of 2018. I would say it was probably until about November-ish. I started seeing a therapist in November. And me and that therapist didn't really click that much, but it was somebody outside of my house, my friends, my family that I could talk to, and try to be as transparent as I could, that started the process of being more intentional about finding joy and letting go of this dark depression that I was under. And so that was about 3 months later. And then in probably, Bryce started getting sick around May of 2019. And so I started taking care of my health and everything around February of 2019, which really helped. Feeling better about my body and just helped my mind come up out of that dark space a little bit. I kept going to therapy. I kept being intentional about telling myself a different narrative. One of the things that I learned in therapy was that whatever story I repeat to myself is the story I'm going to live out loud. And so if I keep telling myself the same story, that I'm cursed, that my womb is cursed, that my life is cursed, that nothing good will ever come from me trying to build or create a family, that I don't deserve nice things, that her dying was my fault, that Bryce not having progress was my fault, that I wasn't doing enough, being enough. That's what I was telling myself. And I would repeat this story either consciously or unconsciously all the time, continuously. And that's the life that I felt like I was living in. I had to recreate and reconstruct the story that I was telling myself. And I started telling myself that I'm a survivor instead of a victim, that I have so much grace in my life that I could go through what I was going through and still be trying to find my way out of that hole, that there were people and places and opportunities that were being presented to me to help me, but I wasn't being open to any of that. So I was creating the story that was keeping me in that dark place. I was telling my story to myself that was keeping me in that dark space. And so learning that from therapy was really helping me shift that narrative to something much more positive, which helped me pull myself out of it day by day. And it was on purpose. It was never just one day I woke up and I felt like, oh, I feel so much better today. It was no, when you hear and feel that thought of the evil emptiness coming to you, I started to rebuke it. I started to say, that's the devil telling me that. Who told me that? Nobody told me that. I'm telling myself that lie, which means it didn't come from God. It came from the devil. And that's what I would do. I would just say it over and over again, rebuke it, and tell it to flee from my mind. And so that I could focus on trying to change my life and changing that story. And so Bryce started getting sick in mid 2019. And for the rest of that year, it was just hard. It was up and down with him in and out of the hospital. And in the midst of this, we were not looking to get pregnant again. We were actively trying not to get pregnant. We were using the family method of trying to track my ovulation and stuff. And I bought this kit and I was getting real technical with it. And I'm like, man, I'm going to know it down to the day. Like, we're just going to be very vigilant, and I just knew, and I was preparing myself unknowingly to be able to carry another baby, because I had dropped 60 pounds between having Aleeya and getting pregnant again. I had changed the way I ate. I had changed my whole mindset. I really was just trying to have a positive life and doing it on purpose. And I keep reiterating that, because nothing about my life and finding happiness and joy again, I didn't just happen on accident. You know, God was moving and working, but he prepared my heart, but I had to be the one to do the hard work to open myself up to receive it. And so by the time Bryce had a 42-day hospital stay in August, and we got out the day before Aleeya's death date. We got out on September 16th, and she had passed on September 17th. It was a year anniversary. And so I was very grateful for that. I was looking at that as grace, because I said I didn't want to stay in the hospital during that time, because I knew it was going to be a hard day to get through, and then to be in there dealing with doctors and nurses and Bryce and everything. So I was just really grateful to get out of the hospital in time. And so for her 1 year anniversary, I was so consumed with taking care of Bryce, because we were just newly out of the hospital, that I didn't even do anything really to celebrate other than lighting a candle. But I felt that as long as I was acknowledging her, seeing her, feeling her in my heart, that was enough for me.
I love that you did that. And I do remember that time distinctively, that you were in a hospital in August, because you had posted on Facebook that you were there, and I was in the same position. Me and Max were in the hospital for probably a week stay. And I was just like, well, what can I do for you, girl? Let me send y'all some food or something, because I already know how it is, right? Like, we doing the same thing here. And I'm so happy that you posted, because obviously if you ain't post on Facebook, I didn't know how I was going to bless you.
Yeah. That's
so
part
I'm happy.
Of it. Like a huge part of me shifting my narrative, me changing the way I operate isolation, because I would isolate myself so much in the beginning that they knew that we had a special needs kid. They knew that, they have to kind of stay, to themselves so he doesn't get sick or stuff like people didn't know a tenth of what we were going through, because I wouldn't share. And then I would hold it against people. So I'm going to be mad that you're not in my life the way I want you to be, but I'm not going to be willing to be vulnerable enough to open myself up to share it. And it doesn't have to be on a platform as public as Facebook, but I wouldn't share it privately either with friends, texting or talking in individual conversations, because it always felt like if I ever shared anything about what was going on with me, I was just putting a highlight reel on all of the things that were terrible in my life. And I couldn't take other people seeing it. Like, it was already hard enough dealing with it individually. I thought that I would absolutely be broken in shambles if everybody knew how bad it was.
You snatching my edges right now. You know that, right? You are snatching my edges, because I feel the exact same way. Oh my God. I feel the exact same way. And I have that conversation all the time with my mom. And I'm just like, Ma, I don't even tell you half the stuff, Mom. Girl, you snatching my edges. Lord have mercy. All right, I'm going to let you finish. But you about to drag me. So tell me to share more, because I'm the same way. I'm the exact same way.
And one of the things that it really has blessed my life, and it happened bit by bit by bit by bit. And that's why, Bryce was such a blessing to my life, because I know that he came for the reason of shifting and changing my heart. I know that's why he was with me, but it's hard to deal with the human side of that loss, right? Like, you get with the spiritual, all of the, all the stuff that you're supposed to take and learn, and all the lessons you're supposed to get, but the human side of you is battling with that spiritual side constantly, because it's just difficult to love and take care and be with your baby for so long, and then they just gone, so.
Mm-hmm. Man, no.
Yeah, so
take your time. No.
Yeah, no worries. I got in So we got out in September. In October, we found out we didn't find out. So we were planning a Make-A-Wish trip for Bryce to go to Disney. And we had been planning this since literally the day he turned 2, because you have to wait until you turn 2. It's like 2.5 before they'll accept you or start the process to accept you. And so from the day he turned 2, I started filling out the application, which was ready for him to hit 2.5 so that we could submit it and start that process. So he got approved, but because he was sick and kept getting sick, we had to keep pushing it back. And I said, listen, as long as he is breathing and it is safe to move him, we're taking this trip in November around Thanksgiving, because I did not want to wait. I didn't think anything was going to happen to him, but I didn't want to wait for any experience for him to have based on it being hard for us to do. It was like, as long as it was safe for him to do, we were going to do it. And so the day before we were leaving to go on this trip, I had an appointment to get a pap smear. I think to get a pap smear. So we went to the appointment, and she said, when was your last cycle? And I was like, actually, I'm literally 1 day late. Like, it was supposed to come yesterday, but mine is, it's probably just from the stress from, dealing with him being sick and everything. And I wasn't really too worried about it. She was like, oh, well, we could just take a test, rule that out if you want to. And I was like, nah, I guess I got to pee anyway, right? I'll go. And so I went back to take the test or to give them a sample. And then me and Daryl, my husband's name is Daryl, was sitting in a room waiting on them to come back, just talking. And they came in the room and they was like, well, we're doing this again. I'm like, doing what again? What you mean? And she said, you're pregnant. And we just started like literally screaming, like, what? Like, you got to be kidding us. She was like, I'll give you guys a few minutes. And so we were like hugging each other and crying, because we were like, what the hell? Like, it was very, very unexpected. We're excited, but we're scared to death because, it has just been so much chaos and drama around us trying to have a baby. And so, well, not exactly trying, because getting pregnant was never hard for us. It was just trying to bring this baby earthside alive and healthy. That was the issue. And so all of the things that I had practiced when Aleeya died and dealing with Bryce being sick and in and out of the hospital, I had switched therapists too. And because I would encourage anybody, if you're not having a connection with your therapist or you don't feel like they are giving you what you need, you are not obligated to stay there. And that's the whole reason why there are many, many people in the field. And so one of the things that I would pray for I started being intentional about asking for what I wanted, asking God for what I wanted, opening myself up to receive it. Because a lot of times I would ask for it and then I would do the opposite with my thoughts and actions that made me feel like I didn't deserve to actually get what I was asking for. And so I started asking God for a therapist that was Christian, but that had a specialty in trauma and grief, and that was Black. I was always intentional about trying to find Black caregiver or providers, because I don't want to deal with that extra layer of dealing with somebody who doesn't look like me on top of dealing with everything else I'm dealing with. I don't have time to get you used to being or trying to acclimate you to my experience in general, and then trying to tell you about what's going on with me specifically. Like, it was too much for me. And so that's exactly what I found. I found a Black woman therapist who specialized in trauma and grief, and she was Christian. So the very first session I went to with her was while Bryce was in the hospital. For 45 minutes straight, I wailed and sobbed while she prayed for me. And that was the whole session. Just her praying for me wailing and sobbing, and me feeling like I had a 3-ton brick taken off of my chest by the time that I left, because I had never, with anybody outside of maybe my husband, and maybe not even with him, had such an intimate experience of just letting go and feeling like I didn't have to be in control of how I looked or how I was perceived or what I was talking about. I could just be free to just let go of all of that sadness that was just encompassing my heart. And so I had been meeting with her pretty frequently up until I got pregnant. I really felt like I had shifted my mindset. I was in a better place, but I still wasn't looking to have a baby at that time. But I feel like God was aligning the stars to make sure that I was in the best place possible to carry another baby. And so we found out the day before we left to go on the trip. We enjoyed the trip. We had a really good time. And I was trying to be very intentional about making it about Bryce and just really celebrating his life and allowing him to just have this experience that we know we would never have been able to do without Make-A-Wish's help, because it was so intense. It was just a lot. It was traveling with his oxygen and making sure we had enough of the batteries when we go to the parks. And we stayed at the Make-A-Wish Village, which was absolutely incredible. And they accommodated us in every way possible, allowing his brother to be able to enjoy himself. It was a lot going on, but it was absolutely worth it. So the duration of the pregnancy, I had learned so much more between having Bryce and having Aleeya that I was much more assertive in my care. And although I didn't have any physical ailments going on, I did take an aspirin. Yeah, an aspirin. And I did not opt to get those shots. One of the things that I read about the side effects of them, and I know they work for many women.
Are you talking about like progesterone shots?
Yeah, yep.
Mm-hmm.
You can get blood clots if your blood is prone to them. And after I had Aleeya, I had some testing done to see if there were any issues or anything going on. And although I cannot remember the name of whatever condition they were looking for, it has something to do with blood clots. And my score was like an indeterminate range. I wasn't low enough that they would say, okay, you don't have to worry about this at all, but I was close to low. Definitely not high enough that they would say that is what the condition was. I really wish I could remember the name of what it was, but you were also supposed to look at it clinically to see if I would be in this category to say that I had this condition. And based on having a stillbirth and what happened, having a placental abruption for my first pregnancy, they still didn't diagnose me with anything, but for me, it was enough. I don't need to go through more and more trauma to know that it may be likely that blood clots weren't involved and y'all just didn't find it. I don't know, because when they did the autopsy on Aleeya, it was nothing wrong. They didn't find any knots in her cord, or I didn't have any type of placental abruption again, or anything that would have given them a reason as to why she passed. She just passed. And so I agreed to take the aspirin, and I didn't take those shots. And for the gestational diabetes, I took the 1 hour test, and I didn't pass it by a couple of points, but I had been tracking my sugar since I found out I was pregnant, like literally the same week or the next week I got the supplies to keep tracking my sugar. So I knew all along that I was okay because I had been tracking it from the beginning. I wasn't going to wait until take it at 28 weeks or whenever they do the test to figure that out. So I never took the 3 hour test because I had already been tracking my sugars. She just started making me send them to her. So every week I would send her what my sugar was every week, and they continued to be fine until the end when I didn't have to do it anymore. So one of the things that was helpful to me during this pregnancy was continuing to tell myself the truth. So I've been talking about the narrative and how I phrase things and what I'm repeating to myself. If I felt like because I also felt like from conception, the exact opposite of what I felt with Aleeya. I felt like this baby was going to come home healthy and whole. And I kept repeating that to myself over and over again. It was very difficult. I would say the beginning of the pregnancy was pretty easy for me as far as thinking nothing was going to happen to him. The end was harder because that's where my trauma occurred. My trauma occurred with Bryce. I was 35 and 6 when my placenta abrupted. Then I was 34 weeks when Aleeya passed. So my mind was pretty relaxed most of the time until I got to about 28 weeks. And I started like panicking. And I was thinking literally, if I did not feel him move within 30 minutes, I felt like, oh, he's not there anymore. Like I would just go into these crazy spins. And so one of the things that was tangible that I did was that I asked for more monitoring. So I would get, starting at 29 weeks, I got the biophysicals on Mondays, and on Thursdays, I got a non-stress test. And I did that twice a week, every week until I had the baby. That was one tangible thing that helped, but one thing that helped me tremendously mentally, of course, to calm down some, He also was a very, very active baby. So it was a rare occasion that I didn't feel him moving, was doing the kick counts. I was on it with that. You know, if I felt like it was an hour or two that went by and I didn't feel him move, I always felt him move, but if I didn't feel him move as frequently as he usually did, I started tracking it for that couple of hours to make sure I got my 10 kicks. Another thing was that I had read this book, Supernatural Childbirth. And it had, at the end of this book, it had all of these kind of like verses and mantras and things that you can say to yourself. And I screenshotted all of those. And every day at the end of the day, I would go back to my screenshot and I would read it. And it would talk about how you were speaking to yourself about how the baby was going to be healthy from literally naming all of the organs and all of the different ways that the baby's body was going to come together, all the way to how the baby was going to be a good sleeper and have a good temperament and stuff when he was born. Like it was a way for me to speak to myself in a positive way that has always worked for me when I do it on purpose and repetitively and consistently, that helped pull me out of those dark places in my mind. And so for me, I was always searching for positive birth stories. I was listening to another podcast. I don't even remember the name. I think it might be Birth Stories or something. I don't remember. That was just that. It was telling people, and they weren't always, peaches and cream, because everybody's story is different, but it always resulted in a live birth. And that's what I needed to hear. And that's what I needed to replay over and over again in my mind. I liked hearing the birth stories, even though I knew I was going to have another C-section that had, even if they were vaginal births or C-section, it didn't make a difference. I just liked to hear people's process of what they went through birth-wise to have a healthy baby come forward, because that's what I was visualizing for myself literally every day. Taking care of Bryce took up 99% of my day, but the 1% of time that I had to myself, I would spend really focusing on a positive outcome. And so I was also working all of that time. COVID hit, obviously, which changed the way we could go to do our prenatal appointments, but it wasn't a huge change for us, because once COVID hit and Bryce couldn't go to daycare anymore, Daryl had to stay here with him, and we couldn't take him with us to the appointments anyway. So I would go to the appointments by myself and just keep kind of trekking forward. So in the midst of dealing with the pregnancy and trying to do positive self-talk and all the things that I had going on with my body, Bryce was also getting more and more sick. So he had been diagnosed with chronic lung disease at birth as well, because he was on oxygen for a long time. And then when he kept getting sick throughout the years, they were always respiratory related. And so he got diagnosed with that as well. So at about 9 months, we got home oxygen for him. And so when he would get sick or anything like that, we would put him on a pulse ox, which is a machine that just measures your heart rate and your oxygen levels. And we would watch him pretty much continuously to make sure he didn't need any other interventions. And when we came home, or when we got the stay-at-home order in March, it was almost simultaneous with him getting really, really sick. Now, I don't know if he ever had COVID. I don't think so. I think because it was very similar to his other illnesses and it wasn't like super severe, but he got sick enough that, we probably would have taken him to the hospital if it wasn't for COVID. And we were in communication with his team, and they kept encouraging us. We would stay in communication, but they said if he's stable enough for you to take care of him at home, keep him home. It's not worth the risk of him getting COVID on top of whatever else he has going on, because it would not be good for him. And so as March and April, it was up and down. It was back and forth, but he started having issues with eating. Like when he would eat, his oxygen levels would go down. And so we were always battling, like, how do we feed him and keep him alive? Like, it was really hard to balance. And one doctor would refer you to another doctor, and it was just very frustrating. And this is another part of it that was in isolation. With him, I was very, very protective of him and his story, because I just didn't want him to be exploited or us to be exploited. And I definitely didn't want my pain and my trauma to be exploited for other people just to look and gawk at and say, oh, I'm just so sorry you're going through that. Oh, you know, I just want the details of it just so I can know, but not because I'm really invested in praying for your family, showing up for your family, you know, really doing anything to try to help you through your trauma. I just want to know what's going on, to be nosy and talk about you in the background. And so I was really protective of sharing what was really going on with him with anybody else. And so, but I was having very, very high anxiety about leaving him to go have the baby. I knew we were having a scheduled C-section on June 29th of this year, 2020. And for weeks, I was just like in a terrible place with the anxiety, because I said, if I just don't want to leave him, I'm just terrified that something is going to happen to him. And when I'm saying something's going to happen, I'm thinking we're going to be hospitalized again. And I'm going to have to figure out how we're going to navigate having a newborn and trying to be at the hospital with him and healing from the C-section. And so, and I didn't want him to obviously be in any additional pain or and me not be right next to him like I always had been. And so my husband's parents came up the weekend before we were scheduled to go in for the C-section. And I was teaching her, Daryl's mom, like the cares and stuff and whatnot on how to take care of him. But I knew my anxiety was not going to be calmed at all unless Daryl was here too. So me and my husband both agreed that we would go to the delivery because it was very early. We had to be there at 6 a.m. And the surgery was scheduled for 8 a.m. And then he would stay with me until 12. And then he would come home and do Bryce's cares, make sure he was okay. And if he was stable enough, then he would come back to the hospital. Otherwise, he would stay here. And he was definitely going to stay here overnight with him. But he may come back to the hospital for a couple hours. So the morning of the C-section, I had, when I came to check on Bryce, he was his normal self. So I would not say if this was a typical kid, he presented like that, you probably would be scared. But when you're a special needs mom and you kind of know your kid, I knew he was okay. And he was also connected to his pulse ox and stuff. And his numbers look good. So I definitely felt confident he'd be good enough for us to get through the surgery and for Dale to get back home. And so that's what we did. We packed up, made sure he was good, said our goodbyes. And I was, in my rush and anxiety of having this new baby, I didn't spend a whole lot of time with Bryce. I just kind of made sure he was good, checked him over, rubbed his head and left. And so we get to the hospital. The birth is like as perfect as it could be. I had to get tested for COVID before we went back for the surgery. But other than that, it was picture perfect. I had the gospel playlist playing in the background. And like at the moment that she took out Brayden, we didn't know the sex of the baby. And at the moment she took out Brayden, she said, look at what you guys made. I just started like shouting and speaking in tongues. Probably I was like outside of myself, so happy and joyful that we had this perfect birth. And Good Father was playing on the speaker. And it was just like, it was everything I could have imagined. It was beautiful. And he was crying and screaming the moment he came out, which was always my prayer because I never heard Bryce cry, never heard Aleeya cry. So it was just an amazing moment for us. And so the rest of the day went by pretty, uneventful. We just shared the news and we were so excited and everything. And everybody was so happy for us. And we were looking forward to coming home. Daryl ended up coming back home around 2. He stayed a little bit later. He came home around 2. He FaceTimed me with Bryce. Bryce got to see Brayden. And he looked at him through the camera and everything. And, when you have a baby that has a brain injury, or at least for my baby in particular, you always don't know what they are cognizant of or what he's looking at or what he's aware of. And so, but he looked at me and he looked at Brayden, he looked at the camera, and I know he heard me and he saw me. My husband started doing his cares. And it was storming really bad outside. And I said, that's weird. It always rains when it's some important day for us. Like it rained the day we got married, cats and dogs. It rained cats and dogs the day Bryce came home. I don't remember if it rained the day that Aleeya died, but I felt like it might've been raining the day we came home. I was like, it's just always rain. I said, but at least this is a good day. I was like, it can rain all it wants to rain. We know the outcome already. Like Brayden is here. He's safe. It's all good. But because it was raining so bad, I told Daryl to stay at home. I said, don't come back up here. I don't want you driving in that storm. And so he stayed at home. And as the night was kind of progressing, he was like, Bryce his numbers are kind of downtrending. He's not really coming back up. I don't know what's going on with him. And he was kind of unresponsive. But he had just gotten his night meds, which kind of knocked him out. So I'm thinking, it was probably a combination of his meds. Maybe he needs to be suctioned or something. And so I'm going through all the things that I usually do for him. And I was directing him, and he was doing everything I said. And his numbers came back up. So we're like, great, he's good. Daryl let him lay down. He went and got something to eat. And then his pulse ox started going off again. And so Daryl went in there, checked on him again. He was like, man, something just isn't right. He's just continuing to downtrend, and but he's not doing anything. Like, he's just laying here, and I'm not quite sure what's going on. Usually that would happen if he coughed or something to make sense. Something would be happening, but him to just be laying still, it was odd for him. And so after a few minutes, I felt that he would turn it around at some point. But Daryl was adamant, based on him looking at him and seeing him, because we were on the phone this whole time, that, no, we probably need to go ahead and call the ambulance, because this is not a normal kind of up and down situation from him. He knew that it looked odd. And so he called the ambulance to come to the house. And honestly, it was in a matter of, this was at maybe 10 o'clock. I don't even remember. It was 11 o'clock that this was happening. The paramedics came in the house, and he got off the phone with me at this point, but he just kind of recanted what happened and said that they took him from his bedroom to the ambulance. When they got in the ambulance, usually at home we have him turn on his side, because for whatever reason, that's kind of his recovery position. But when they put him in the ambulance, they put him on his back, and they gave him much more oxygen than what we could supply here, but that he was really, I guess, just staying at the same level, not really seeing any improvement. They were trying to suction him and whatnot. And the hospital is less than 10 minutes from here. And about 3 minutes from the hospital, he just coded. Heart just stopped. And everything was alarming, and they started doing CPR on him, and they bagged him, and they just could not get his heartbeat back. So when they get to the hospital, they were working on him for probably about an hour and a half, doing CPR, giving him something called IOs, where they stick him in the leg to try to give the epinephrine to the heart to get the heart restarted. And they couldn't get it to restart. And they just continuously working on him. And I kept asking Daryl, like, what are his sats? What is it saying on the screen? And he wasn't really saying anything. He was like, I can't see. There's too many people in the room. I don't see anything on the screen. Or he would say it's only going up and down when they press it on him. Every time they stop, he flatlines again. And so the doctor got on the phone with me, and he's trying to explain it to me. And I'm in such turmoil because I can't be there. And I was trying to listen to what the doctor was saying and trying to be analytical about what was happening. But in my heart, my heart was breaking, and I started screaming to the top of my lungs, and the nurses and stuff ran in the room to see what was going on, because they thought something was going on with the new baby. And somebody took the baby from me, because I was just in complete just breakdown. And Daryl got back on the phone. The doctor had told me before he got off the phone that they were going to work on him for another 10 minutes. And if they could not get his heartbeat back, that was going to be it. That was all that they could do, because he has to at least have some type of heartbeat for them to put him on ECMO or whatever they were thinking about doing before they would transport him to Children's. He wasn't at the Children's Hospital. He was at our local hospital. And so that's what happened. They worked on him for another 10 minutes. They couldn't get his heartbeat back. And they clearly conveyed that to Daryl, because he just wailed and made this sound that I've just never heard before. And I just lost my mind. I don't even know what else I felt like it's a cruel, cruel curse to give me such a beautiful day that ends with my baby dying. And so, in the immediate, his parents that were at the house with Jordan, our other son, came up to the hospital, and they all got to say goodbye to him and hold him and be with him for probably about another hour or so. And while I was at the hospital, I kept saying I was about to leave. Now, mind you, I had a C-section hours before. Like, clearly, it's not the safest thing for me to try to get up. And I hadn't even, I think I had sat up at that point, but I hadn't actually walked anywhere. But I didn't even care about the pain. I was just in such chaos. I was like, I'm leaving the hospital right now. And they were telling me about how the baby could stay in the nursery. I was like, you're not hearing me. I'm not leaving my baby. I'm leaving, he coming with me, and I'm leaving right now to go with my son. Like, I can't stay here and not be with him, because I just felt an immense amount of guilt that it was my fault. If I never would have left him, he wouldn't have died and whatnot. But they were giving, they didn't give me anything. Daryl called me back finally. He was the one who kind of talked me out of it and talked me down and said that he would come to the hospital with me. But I knew that it was irrational, but that's what my heart was saying. So I couldn't rationalize him coming to the hospital to see me, because I'm like, I need to go be with Bryce. Daryl, he got me to agree to stay, because I kept saying that I was leaving in the morning. I don't know what I plan on doing. I just know I just felt like I needed to be close to him or closer to him, or I don't know. I wasn't really thinking past the point of I need to get out of here. And so we stayed. We actually ended up staying the additional day that we were supposed to stay. They wanted us to stay 3 days, but I said I can't do it any longer than that. I feel like I need to get out of here. I don't know. I need to move. I need to do something. And when I came to the house, his parents were here. My parents ended up coming to the hospital to help us, which was great because it was a good distraction, but we also had to deal with the business of death and the things that go behind it. And so they were a help with helping us organize that, because his body was moved from Wisconsin to Indiana. And so we had to kind of organize that happening. And when I came home, at first I thought I was going to be okay. And I walked in the door. Right at the top of our stairs, there is that's where we kept his oxygen, like his oxygen concentrator in the hallway. And I couldn't hear it, but I could see it, and it wasn't on. And that triggered me, because it has been on nonstop, constantly. It's always this humming, this buzzing that's in our house constantly, that wasn't there. And that triggered me to start screaming again. And, it was a whole thing. And then I have to go immediately from that to, well, now I need to feed the baby, and I'm breastfeeding. So, and he was crying and stuff because he needed to eat. And I'm like, I can't even mourn or process what's going on with losing my son, because I have to take care of this baby. And so it was like, it was trying to reconcile in my mind that, first of all, I kept thinking every milestone that I have with this baby is going to be in combination with the death date of Bryce, because his technical death date was the same day that the baby was born. And so I just had like a thousand things going on in my head at the same time. And then I'm thinking, we got to get this equipment out of here, because they charging insurance every day that it's in here. And it was a lot. It was the business side of what needed to be done, the morning side of what needed to be done, and taking care of a newborn all at the same time. And so my mother is remarried, so my father came up here as well. One of my sisters came up here. My grandmother was up here. They were all kind of surrounding us in the first days of being home and helping us clean the house and take care of Jordan, and just trying to help me and my healing and all of that. And then they left. Everybody, they stayed, and then my other sister came up with her children over the weekend. And then everybody left, and we were only here for about a day by ourselves, but we also had to go to the hospital or to the doctor's office to take the new baby to his first appointment, and then he had to go for a weight check. And so it was just all these different things happening within the first week. Then we traveled to Indiana, where the funeral was going to be held, to make sure that Bryce had everything that he needed for the funeral. My husband was pretty much handling all the business side of it. So I didn't have to deal with that. But we prepared to have his funeral in Indiana the following Friday after he passed. So right now, it'll be a week ago, yesterday, that we had his funeral. And one of the reasons that I wanted to do this podcast interview pretty soon after everything happened was because I needed to do this while it was fresh. I feel like I needed to recant the story of this journey through motherhood in a way where it was still raw to me, because I know it's somebody listening to this podcast that has been through something that they feel like is going to rip them apart in their life. They can't move forward. You could not have told me that if anything would ever to happen to Bryce, he was my life. When I say it is a different level of, in my opinion, from having a typical child and having a special needs child, that I am his eyes and ears. I'm his limbs. He can't function without me. So it's a different thing than a child who has the ability to imagine, play, do things on their own, because although they may be your world, they literally don't need you to function and to breathe and stay alive. And because that's the role that I was for him, I felt like he was my identity almost. And so how do I live without him? Because he could not function without me. So how do I wake up every day and move in this world without him when he was all that I did for years? So I wanted to do this on purpose, because if you could see me 3 weeks out from, or his funeral was 2 weeks ago. I take that back, not a week ago, 2 weeks ago. If you can see me out in this world functioning, living in the midst of COVID, which makes another level of the grief harder, because you can't, be in the community the way you would. You have to just continue to stay isolated or I am, at least my family is continuing to stay isolated for our safety. Then you can do this too. I don't have the magic pill or answer for what's going to pull you through your grief and your sadness right now, but I can tell you that you can do it, and you can do it in a way that doesn't leave you feeling like a piece of you will never be the same, to where you can't function in a way that you can be at the same level of happiness or joy that you had previous to your loss or previous to the trauma that happened to you. You can. That doesn't mean that you're not going to have moments of being human and feeling the grief and sitting in it and dealing with it. But because you sat in it, because you're dealing with it, because you are telling yourself a narrative, a story, that you're a survivor, that look at all the grace God has given you. I was Bryce's parent. I was Aleeya's parent. That was my assignment. And because I was a good steward of my assignment, I got blessed with Brayden. That's my story. That may not be yours, but I truly believe, and I didn't plan on having Brayden, and I for damn sure didn't plan on having him the day that Bryce died and having to deal with what that means in my life. But one thing I know for sure is that I was the best steward I could be for the assignment that I had, which was carrying Aleeya, which was being Bryce's mama for those 3.5 years. And losing him always is going to hurt me deeply. But I'm not going to focus on the day that Aleeya died or the day that Bryce died as the culmination of their gift to me. That wasn't what their life was. And it's hard when you're dealing with a baby that you didn't get to hold on the outside alive and breathing, right? You're dealing with, well, what memories do I have to be able to say that this was something that was supposed to be a gift for me or something that was supposed to be purposeful for me? For me, I feel like I had to go through the trauma of losing her so that I can be prepared for the trauma of losing Bryce. And I had to be prepared in a way that I know I could bounce back and be the mama that I'm supposed to be for Brayden. And your story ain't gonna look like mine, but it's something that you can identify in with what I'm saying. that can let you know that you can come out of that dark hole that you may be in. You just got to change the narrative. You are not a victim of your circumstances. You are a survivor of what happened to you. And you can only turn that pain into purpose if you keep telling yourself on purpose that you are here for a reason, that this grace that is over you is here to keep you and sustain you and lift you and put you back in a place where you feel like you are special, you are whole, and you are joy. Bryce was joy for me. And so I feel like I'm doing him a disservice if I spend the rest of my life wallowing in the last 2 hours of his life or 3 hours of his life before he died, instead of focusing on all the beautiful times I had with him and the blessing that it was to be his parent. But it's something I have to tell myself every day. That's not, the day after the funeral, I woke up renewed and refreshed, ready to hit the world, and all the trauma has been behind me. No, I still have to come back to the house where he lived. I still have to go through the medical equipment that he has. We have to go through the business side of what it is to parent a special needs baby that passes. But I also know that we found joy still being isolated and sitting in his house with all we have is memories of him, where it can be extremely difficult just to function. And that's not how we live in. We're not living in that space of feeling like we can't do anything outside of wallow, because we know that's not what God has for us. And so my relationship with God went from this up and down roller coaster of feeling like he's left me and forsaken me from the time we went through the things that we went through, from his birth to Aleeya's death to his passing again. But one thing I always knew for sure was that he was going to bring me out, that his grace was sufficient and that he was strong in my weakness. So if I was willing to be vulnerable enough and open myself up enough to let God in, he was always there. But am I going to open myself up enough to let him in? And I have. And I did that enough that my relationship with him is strong enough that I know I can survive almost anything. Always been with me, So now, I can go on and on, but really that's the summation of how I'm here today and the reason why I decided to do this podcast so early from his past. And I really needed people to know that in the immediate, because that's when it's the toughest, in the couple of weeks or months afterwards, and you feel like you just can't catch your next breath. But I am breathing. Here I am breathing. And I know that Brayden was a gift to be able to help me to focus on something other than Bryce's death. But I want to encourage you who don't have another baby immediately. That is a very rare thing. I'm sure most people are not going to lose their baby and get another baby the same day. Like, it just doesn't work like that most of the time. But even if that's not your story, which it likely won't be, you can still do this. Brayden is not the reason why I'm surviving right now. He is not the reason why I find life and joy every day that I open my eyes. It's because I committed myself to telling myself a different narrative. I committed myself to opening myself up to God's grace on my life, to feeling him in his presence right where I needed him. I didn't have to go looking for it. I didn't have to set up some special place in my house to have, prayer time. It was when I needed him, I called out to him. And if I didn't know the words to say, "Help me, oh Lord," is all I got out, he was right there helping me, sustaining me and pulling me through. And you can do it too.
Amen. One thing I love out of your story and journey, and it may be something you had also posted on Facebook, is that grief and joy can coexist. And you basically have shared that with us today, and that God's grace is sufficient in our journey. But one thing I hope people take away out of everything you said is that you spoke it. You spoke over your life, literally. Since your baby girl passed away, or even back when Bryce was born and he was in and out the hospital and going through that journey with him up until when Brayden was born, that you kept speaking it over yourself. So if you don't get anything out of this interview, folks who are listening, it's just that know that you have to speak positively over your life, over your body, over your womb, so that God can bless it. Because if you don't believe it, God's not going to bless it for you. And I am so happy and honored that you wanted to do this and be so vulnerable with us on this journey. So I would love for you to share with us, like, what are the next steps on your grief journey? Obviously, yes, you definitely are going through this whole first year with your baby boy Brayden, and your first year really without Bryce. How are you going to tackle that? Are you going back to therapy? Are you going therapy as a family? How are you all going to take these next steps in your grief journey?
Sure. Yes, therapy happened immediately. I would say probably within 4 or 5 days of being home, I was texting my therapist asking when I could get. I wanted to wait till at least after the funerals just because it was a lot going on, and I was out of town. But I immediately set up that appointment, even if the appointment is not going to be directly after your loss. I would say to encourage you to at least set it up so that you know that it's coming. So that's what I did for me. And then we will be meeting every 2 weeks until I feel like we can go back to monthly. But that's something that I'll continue for indefinite amount of time. And just making sure that I'm always checking in with somebody, always being cognizant, because sometimes too, for me at least, I can get caught up in this appearing like I'm strong when I'm really in shambles on the inside. And so going to therapy keeps that in check for me. It keeps me vulnerable and it keeps me open to sharing whatever my experience is with her. So I'll be doing that. Bryce's birthday is also coming up. He was born on August 3rd. So within the next, it's about 2 weeks away. We actually booked a cabin for us to go and spend some time outside of this house and get a different scene. And we're going to do a party for him and release some lanterns and just kind of celebrate. We're going to stay for a few nights, but we got balloons and cake and just celebrate him. Do something really positive and happy that is surrounding him. And I think for me, I've been sharing a lot on Facebook, the loss and how I'm kind of grieving and how people are helping me and the things that are helpful for us right now. I feel like it may not continue on Facebook, but it's definitely been very, very helpful for me to be extremely transparent. And so transparent with Facebook or transparent with my friends and family through texting and talking has been one of the reasons why I've been able to continue to feel like I can find joy again and I don't have to just wallow all the time. It's because I am constantly being uplifted by the sea of people who are just giving me such positive, whether it be publicly or privately, reaching out to me and just sending me so much love and positive energy, and allows me to talk about him as much as I want to, as much as I need to. He just had a lot of people that loved him. And so because he had a lot of people that loved him, I know they love me and by extension him or whatever, vice versa. It really is helpful for me to share what I'm feeling right at that moment. So if somebody calls me or texts me, I don't really like talking on the phone, but people text me and ask me what's going on or how I'm doing today, I am brutally honest. Like I have gotten past that thing of, oh, I'm okay, I'm fine, doing all right, a little bit rough today or whatever it is. Like if it's fine and good, okay. Because most of the time it is. But if I'm having a moment because something triggered me, I share that, because the people who are checking on me, I know, like one of the things we were saying earlier, Erica, is about not sharing what all you went through or what all you're going through with your son is one of the reasons why I think I was in such a dark place when Aleeya died, because it was like, now I have to deal with the loss of her. Nobody even knew I was pregnant. So I got to deal with the loss of her. And then I have to deal with everything that's going on with him currently. And I'm doing it in a place of isolation, and I just refuse to go back to that. And so I'm just being very honest, brutally honest. Anytime somebody asks me anything, that's another reason, like even with Brayden's pregnancy, I went and took maternity pictures, and then we were going through this thing where, are we going to even share them? Nobody even knows I'm pregnant. And I was like breaking those cycles even then by sharing that picture. That was a big thing for me. And so I know that that's a healing part of my journey, is continuing to be vulnerable, continuing to open up and celebrate him, and I don't know how I'm going to quite deal with the milestones matching his death date. Like that's a little difficult for me right now. So trying to I don't know, to be quite honest, how I'm going to deal with that, because, you know, next week it'll be Brayden's 1 month milestone and Bryce's 1 month since she passed. And saying it doesn't, you know, like knowing that it's coming and saying it doesn't really trigger me, but I'm kind of afraid of how it'll happen on the day, of feeling like, I don't know. So I'm still dealing with that, but just saying that, being vulnerable enough to say it, being vulnerable enough to deal with it, knowing that that might be a trigger for me is important for me. And bringing that up in therapy and figuring out if they can give ways to cope and deal with it, sharing that with my husband, like all of those things help me immensely. And so I'll just be continuing to do that and to open up and kind of share the grief, you know.
Thank you for sharing that. Obviously, I feel like we're kindred spirits because we both experienced a placenta abruption. We've had a baby boy with cerebral palsy, and we've had a stillbirth. Yeah. So obviously, this is like my story. Hearing you share your story is like hearing my story all over again. So obviously, this interview has been me crying in the background, like, Lord have mercy. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to get through this, but girl, Shana, you have tremendously blessed me by sharing your story and being vulnerable. I would love for the listeners to be able to follow you and keep up with you. Definitely, if you post more on your social feeds, where can they connect with you after this episode?
Sure. I think my Instagram is definitely private, but if you request me, I will happily add you. It's Shana Lane. That's SHANA LANE. That's it. It's just Shana Lane.
Just say you from Sisters-in-Law so she can make sure it's the right person. Yep. So it's the right person. Well, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Erica. And this podcast really was a blessing to me when I lost Aleeya. And it continues to be a blessing to me to be able to share and connect with the women. And I know you guys have been just nothing but supportive since Bryce passed. And I didn't think that I would have another baby to, you know, mourn in that group. But everybody has been just phenomenal. And I really want to say thank you and appreciate you all for all the support that you've given my family.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. For show notes, go to sistersinloss.com. To stay connected with us and join the Sisters-in-Law community and receive my weekly newsletter, please go to sistersinloss.com/newsletter. That is sistersinloss.com/newsletter. Please rate and review this episode, and I will talk to you next week.